There had been talk of a Spider-Man movie for a very long time, and it stood to reason. Spider-Man's an enormously popular superhero character, and more times than that, the most popular. You can give Batman a run for his money, which is a lot of money. But one of the things was for a Spider-Man movie to get off the ground, the special effects technology really needed to improve. And by the time the film opened that Sam Raimi had directed, it had arrived good enough. I mean, looking back at it, and by today's standards, which is always going to be the case, it doesn't hold up as much as later versions, but it holds up good enough. The Spider-Man film is a very good film. It's a very good comic book film. Not all superheroes capture the essence of comic books, but this one does. And right off the bat, the choice of directors was, inspired because Sam Raimi had already proven his abilities to understand the pacing and the framing and style of its sequential storytelling. And you see aspects of that in his other films, including his Evil Dead series, but most notably Darkman, which was born out of a missed opportunity of him to adapt The Shadow, I believe. But so he created a character of his own, and all of the aspects of comic books is certainly in there. And so it works very well, and in a lot of ways, again, as I said, is probably one of the all-time best superhero films in that it is a very close adaptation to the elements that comic books bring about. You could never really get there in total. I guess maybe an animated film could do it better, but this is about as good as it gets. There are others. I always refer back to The Rocketeer, which is almost a spot-on adaptation of that comic book character, and in certain elements of narratively to be true to the actual story of the character, they somewhat succeeded with the Iron Man film later on. But right off the bat, this was a good breakout for Spider-Man, and everything seemed to fall into place and be ready for it. Tobey Maguire's performance, he does capture the loner and the awkward kid, and that's very much within Spider-Man's early days, and this is the origin story, so it stands to reason about him being like that. Eventually, that's not really the story for Spider-Man anymore as you go forward, but it's certainly appropriate here of how he is. One of the aspects of it is that we can argue that he captures Peter Parker better than Spider-Man. And perhaps that's in the bits of the scenes of Spider-Man are rather brief in their action scenes, and that business of his sense of humor it's there, but it doesn't quite come across as clever as Spider-Man's smart-ass takes on things, especially at the expense of the villain. Now, it's a first film, and so the major villain for Spider-Man appears, and that's typical of the superhero comics. You had it with Superman. Lex Luthor, of course, shows up, and then with Batman, the Joker's in the first film they do, and so on and so forth. And you're successful, well, you'll get a franchise out of this, and you'll meet the other villains, and such is the case with these films, and certainly happened with Batman, and it happened with Spider-Man. So, who's Spider-Man's Joker? Well, the Green Goblin is pretty much been the main one, at least certainly in my opinion. Casts a long shadow over the others, and there's certain aspects of that in that it's kind of clunky a bit here and there, and over time it builds up more for the Spider-Man stories. But within the comics, of course, is that there's this personal relationship between the two. They're somewhat connected beyond just, well, this is criminal, he stopped, and then a relationship begins there, this hero and villain and enemies that happens over time, and of course in the course of adventure stories, he breaks out of prison or whatever, and they fight again and that sort of thing. But with a character like the Green Goblin, you later discover that, this is the father of one of his classmates, who ultimately becomes his best friend, which was Harry Osborn. There were other characters and students and stuff in college and whatnot that he had friendships with, but outside of his girlfriends, Harry was the best friend. Later on, he actually has something of a friendship with Flash Thompson in later years in his adult life and whatnot. But Harry was the best bud. They started out as Harry picked on him and whatnot in college and all that. But later on, there was a friendship there. And, of course, that's part of the personal relationship here, that Harry's father, and through the stories of when Peter Parker realized that, Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin, he was sort of protective of him, because he kept forgetting. He had obvious mental disorders and would forget his alter ego, and Peter would cover that up, that he had been the Goblin, and just said, we found Norman Osborn, and he hit his head and whatnot, and that old thing. And so that's it's a little different here between other superhero, supervillain interactions with the Green Goblin. Even though over the years, I guess it's about a 10-year run from when Spider-Man started to when Green Goblin is dead. He's killed, and this movie plays an homage to that scene where the Goblin glider hits him, meant for Spider-Man, but Spider-Man gets out of the way, and his own glider kills Norman Osborn. And then you had Harry took his place, Harry's psychiatrist took his place, and then you got to the Hobgoblin story, which was very cool. But it's like the shadow and ghost of Norman Osborn haunted the Spider-Man stories, to where even dead, this was a significant character that seemed to stand above the other villains. Dr. Octopus is the one who comes closest after the Green Goblin, But there's others, like Kurt Connors and whatnot, all this sort of stuff, and how the sort of soap opera nature that Stan Lee introduced into Marvel comic superhero stories fits very well, probably better than any, even the X-Men, with Spider-Man. And you get these elements of that, of Spider-Man's terrible burden, of the hard lesson that he gets with what happens to Uncle Ben, and that's the complete core of him. Peter Parker is kind of tossed aside, he's mocked, and then he gets this bizarre gift, if you will, how it becomes a curse of power, and to some extent he abuses it, and he's cost dearly just based on his attitude. And so he's stuck with the burden of a terrible truth of how he really messed up, and his uncle paid the price. This gets messed up a little later, but for right now it's pretty perfect in this film. And it completely captivates the character of Peter Parker and the ultimate motives of what he has. And it also hinders him in his own life. By the end, he's got the girl. She's realized that she feels the same way about him. Mary Jane confesses her feelings for him, and this is something he's been waiting to hear for years. And after everything that's happened, he's got to turn her down because he's terrified he's just going to get her killed. And so he's going to turn and walk away. Now, this is a bit of a mature act and whatnot, and of course he can't really walk away. They do end up together, but nevertheless, at this point, it's understandable where he is at that point and how it's delivered through the film. There's the elements here that certainly pays respect to the comic book source material about Harry and his father, and the distance between the two, and yet still somewhere within the madness, Norman Osborn did care and love his son, but he was who he was. And of course the source of his powers and whatnot is what causes his downfall. He's damaged by it, and his psyche is completely broken. So it is there, The only nod to the stories on where Spider-Man was protecting Norman Osborn only happens at the end. Even though he's dead, he still protects him. He hides the Goblin stuff and doesn't let anyone know that Norman Osborn had been the Goblin, and so on and so forth. So it's really good, and it captures all the essence of Spider-Man, and that is Spider-Man's story. It's the adaptation of it to a new medium. You can't capture everything. You couldn't capture the entire business of the battle between Green Goblin and Spider-Man through all the different stories that the comics brought, because it's just too much to put in a movie. Even a TV series probably couldn't catch it all. So, but it does do well to get the essence of those characters and everything in it, and it's good casting pretty much all around, especially with Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn. They don't look like the characters in the comics, but they do look related. They Willem Dafoe and James Franco, it looks like that, Willem Dafoe could have been his father, and so on and so forth. The Green Goblin costume is pretty bad. It's just really bad. There were other things leading up to it. There was this concept art that Alex Ross had done where they were thinking of him being more of a medieval looking character, which would make sense. A goblin is out of fairy tales of medieval times and stuff like that. And then there was this mask they tested that looked pretty good because it was close to the Goblin look, but they didn't go with it. I guess the story was Willem Dafoe didn't like it or something. I don't know. What are you gonna do? His performance is pretty good. I mean, the voice and Willem Dafoe could have made a great Joker too. So he's got that sinister look. It's too bad that they couldn't have done something with his face. But the problem there is that then everyone would know that the Green Goblin is Willem Dafoe, but I mean Norman Osborn, because it's like, hey, there's Norman Osborn. I wonder why he painted his face green, because that's what it would look like. But his face really does look like very goblin-like when he's having his meltdowns and everything. It captures so many things. All of the elements and having a crush on somebody and all this stuff, and then the drives that happens between the characters, all very well handled and delivered, and it's damn near perfect except for some of the flaws here and there, but all in all, a very good superhero film, and a lesson for other superhero films to look to about how it's done. And so there it is. And it's also the burdens that Spider-Man bears, because a lot of Spider-Man, you have the adventure and you have the excitement of the powers and his cool costume, which is easily one of the, if not the best, one of the best all-time designed superhero outfits. But you also have that at the end of it, Spider-Man endures a sad story more times than not. It's almost on par with Batman of how sad of an existence he leads. Now, he's had happier times. Eventually, they got him to where he and Mary Jane got married. There's even, which I consider canon, in their later years, they do have a daughter. And stuff like that, so that Spider-Man gets some happiness, but there's an awful lot of suffering there, and that's very apparent there and treated very well. And is rather poetic to it. So that's the only other thing about the costume is that it's fine. They went with this design where the webs tend to look white on the suit when light hits them and what have you, and it's all a very fancy suit. But I don't know how a high school kid or a college kid with very little money could achieve that. So I always thought they could have done it where he had kind of a crappy version of it that he made himself with the sweatpants and whatnot, and then a costume shop did a proper design of it, because there was like this Spider-Man mania going on throughout the city, and that he just goes and gets one of those. Could have been a way to explain it, but what are you gonna do? So it was off to a great start. It showed such promise. The music, of course, Danny Elfman was the go-to guy since Batman, and I think this is a much better Spider-Man theme song than the one they later went with. And it evokes, again, the comic book superhero story, the achieving of greatness, and winning in the end, and all that sort of stuff. And so it's all very well, and the hint of mystery to it, in the sense of what happens to him, and so on and so forth, and him having to come to terms with it. But a very well done, well-round package, and that's Spider-Man. In my opinion, there have only been 2 great Spider-Man films, and we haven't had any since. It's too bad, because the template is readily available, certainly within this film here. But it's here. It's done. We'll always have it. It certainly does have rewatchability. So if you haven't watched it in a while, treat yourself and enjoy Spider-Man. Thanks for watching and listening. Say, while you're still here, why not like and subscribe and share with your many friends? Yes. Also, check out my mini stores in the link description below. Yes, where you can get t-shirts, hats, mugs, all those goodies with my artwork on them. Oh, yeah. And head over to indieplanet.com and pick up a copy of my comic book, Night Night. Oh, yeah. You can also catch me at my podcast, Mr Nailsin Show, on RadioMisfits.com. And you can also watch my videos on BitChute.com and now on Rumble.com. Oh, my goodness, so many places to watch me and my stuff. Oh, yeah. And if that's not enough for you, well, you can follow me on many social media platforms and say hi to your old pal, Mr. Nailsin.